Hey guys, just Mr. Mulaney here doing a quick recap of Genesis 6 through 9 in case you happen to missed it. Um, so this is Noah's Ark, and yeah, we'll be covering A, B, and C here. We'll start off with just one of my favorite images of Noah's Ark. I like it because at first you don't think, oh, that's an image of Noah's Ark. You just focus on the red in the background, the chaos, the violence, yeah, just the wickedness that humanity has gotten itself into. Love this cow in the center here, just staring right into your soul, like you know what's about to happen to me. Um, and then as you get into the center, though, it's almost as if it's like bathed in a spotlight of tranquility. You got Noah's Ark, and so the flood has begun in this picture, and yeah, it's just showing how bad it had gotten. People climbing up in the trees out of fear. Um, yeah, and you can see people just committing terror. You've got a baby crying there. Um, the world is really messed up at that point, according to Genesis. And so God, before he floods everything, he preserves a microcosm or like a mini universe of his good order, taking all of the humans that were good, Noah and his family, and then all the animals, and yeah, they survived the flood. At the end of it, God creates a covenant. And so, covenant is a sacred agreement or promise. God makes a couple of these throughout the course of Scripture. This is the first one, though. And you'll notice at the end of the story when they get off the boat and Noah offers sacrifice, and God says, "Never again will I flood the earth." Yeah, it basically amounts to, don't worry, I won't do that again. Um, this is the first covenant in Scripture, and it might seem like, wow, that's quite an agreement, God. Quite a promise. But you have to keep in mind that this is humanity really getting to know God for the first time. Keep in mind the analogy that we had earlier when we were talking about natural revelation versus divine revelation and this mysterious head of school. Some people deny that the head of school even exists. No one's seen her or him. But there's an office that's locked and you can't get in. The only thing you can do to communicate with this possible head of school is to throw a note under the door and hope that he or she responds. This covenant is huge. This first covenant is huge because imagine you were in front of that door and it opened and you had been, trying to break it down maybe, or you threw a note underneath and you know nothing about the actual head of school, like you know nothing of Mrs. Brudney, and the door opens and there's this woman. If you have your wits about you, if you know what's at stake, you would be very afraid because she might expel you. You have no idea what would anger her or cause her to punish you. This first covenant in Scripture is God communicating with Noah and humanity at this point in a direct way for the first time since the fall. And then Cain and Abel and that whole thing. So like this new world that God has created after the flood, this is his first interaction with humanity since that. And God's saying, I'm not going to expel you. Don't worry. Don't worry. I'm not going to get you in trouble. I'm not going to kill you. I'm on your side. And that's why the rainbow is such a lovely image here. Here's a double rainbow, actually. The rainbow is great because it comes always after a storm, right? So during a storm, when you're most tempted to think that these greater forces in nature are out to get you and kill you, it's always after those moments that the rainbow comes. and it's this sign of great beauty and peace. And so the scripture writers and God working through them use that as a sign of, no, look at the rainbow, look for the rainbow, that's the more important thing. No matter how bad the storm is, look for the rainbow because that's more important. You can trust me. Nature isn't trying to get you. It's not out to expel you. I'm on your side. I won't be flooding the earth to kill every living thing. So yeah, I have a double rainbow YouTube video here. If you haven't seen, I'm not going to show it here because the quality suffers when it's being recorded through a screen recording. But yeah, if you haven't ever seen the double rainbow YouTube video, I recommend just Googling double rainbow and watching it, and then after that, Googling double rainbow auto-tune, because it's amazing. So yeah, that's the covenant. There are two etiologies here. Remember, etiology is a story or a detail. It's meant to explain where something comes from. So there are two things that are explanations of where things come from in this story. And it's, the first one's pretty obvious. This is where rainbows come from, if you didn't know. The second one is a lot more strange and complex. It's why Canaanites are shameful. So, it helps to have some background information, some background familiarity here. First off, the Canaanites are the people who lived in the land of Canaan. The land of Canaan was what would become the promised land. That is, the land that the Israelites would come in and invade and take over because God had promised this land to them. So, modern-day Israel and then some surrounding areas. The Canaanites were living there at the time, and the Israelites, just totally took over, slaughtered a lot of them, enslaved others, and then in general just had this terrible rivalry with the Canaanites. When the Israelites weren't on their game, they were falling into idolatry by worshiping the gods of the Canaanites. And yeah, the Canaanites are basically a constant rival for God and God's attention throughout the Old Testament. So at this point in the story, it's the end of chapter 9. Noah and his family have gotten off the boat. Noah, he's a man of the soil. He plants the first vineyard. He has the first wine. He has the first drunkenness. And I love the way that the Bible describes it. So he fell asleep naked in his tent. Like you do. Like, it's just like so matter of fact. His son, Ham. Noah has 3 sons. There's Ham, there's Shem, and Japheth, or Japheth. And Ham sees Noah in the tent. And then it describes how he goes out and tells his brothers about it. His brothers, Shem and Japheth, they walk backwards, carrying a blanket on their backs, and cover Noah's nakedness without looking at him. And then it describes strangely, when Noah woke up and discovered what his son had done to him, he cursed Ham, saying, it's the what his son had done to him line that's very strange and suggestive that Ham didn't just see his father naked, that he molested him. So check the footnote on that line there, or that's part of the story, and you'll see that the Canaanites, when the Israelites came in, they had some weird sexual indecent practices in their religion, and this story is an etiology for why the Canaanites are so shameful. So Noah curses Ham by cursing his son, saying he'll be a slave forever. May he serve his brothers, may he be a slave to his brothers and his brothers' descendants. And so this justified for the Israelites why the Canaanites were so wicked. It was because their ancestor, Ham, was this messed up dude who messed with Noah. So, yeah, you might be wondering, why would Noah curse Ham by cursing Canaan? In the ancient world, it was a very collectivistic mindset, not individualistic at all. In today's world, we're very used to saying, like, everyone's unique, everyone's different, everyone's a unique and beautiful snowflake, different from every other snowflake. In the ancient world, that would be, like, just nonsense. In the ancient world, you were part of your family, your clan, your kinsmen, and you wanted to behave as every member of your family, and every member of your family wanted to behave as every other member of your family. So, if there's a person that I'm encountering, like Alexis Mullaney, my wife, if you were to encounter Alexis Mullaney, you wouldn't expect her to be, this unique person. You would expect her to be just like every other Mullaney in the history of the Mullanys. Moreover, Alexis Mullaney would want to behave like every other Mullaney. She would feel uncomfortable if she started to stick out too much. So, Noah cursing Ham, it makes total sense to say that Canaan would become the slave. It's psychologically and just sociologically, that's one way to punish people, is to punish their descendants. Also, it seems like this story is a combination of two oral traditions. One oral tradition, it was Ham that did the bad thing, and the other one, it was Canaan who did the bad thing. And it seems like the priestly tradition that put this together during the Babylonian exile, which happened in what year, by the way? 587, that's right. It seems like they just smashed the two together and split the difference and said Ham did the bad thing, Canaan got the curse. In any event, I bring this all up because this is a very historically important passage. Not for a good reason, though. In the transatlantic slave trade, which World Culture's Knowledge, 1500s to the 1800s, there were a lot of Christian slave owners, and because they're Christian, there's the natural question of, how is it that you, a Christian, could own slaves and participate in this barbaric practice of the transatlantic slave trade? And the Christian slave owners basically went like, well, give me a second. And they went into their Bible. And, 9 chapters into the Bible, they were able to be like, let me tell you why it's okay for me to own slaves. It's because all people from Africa are descendants of Ham. And we in Europe and America are descendants of Shem or Japheth. Therefore, we are fulfilling the words of our common father Noah by, enslaving the Africans. This is a totally BS interpretation of this section of the Bible. The Catholic Church has never supported it in any official capacity. In fact, the Church on a number of occasions, very early and throughout the transatlantic slave trade, condemned the practice, at certain points threatened excommunication for anyone who participated in it, very against the practice of slavery, especially as it was practiced in the African slave trade, transatlantic slave trade. Unfortunately, a number of individual Catholics, even Catholic bishops, even monasteries and convents in America owned slaves, and a couple of them would even bring out this terrible interpretation of Genesis chapter 9 to justify their slave owning. But that is why Canaanites are shameful for the Israelites. And here's one artist's representation of the cursing of Ham. There's Noah, Ham. Lastly, foreshadowing. Alright, foreshadowing. You probably learned this term in World Lit. Foreshadowing is when one event in a story kind of tells you what's going to happen later in the story. the Bible uses a ton of foreshadowing, except when it comes to foreshadowing in the Bible, there's a special type of foreshadowing that gets the term archetype or prefiguration. So this is when something in the Old Testament foreshadows something in the New Testament. And I have a picture here, or two pictures, and I'll zoom in on them, and I encourage you to see if you can figure out the connection, how one foreshadows the other, and then I'll explain it. But get your brain thinking here. Here's the first one. Here's the second one. I'm not going to tell you what it is. I think you can guess, or at least get enough information from just looking at it, what's happening. Once again, here's the first. Here's the second. So, how does one prefigure the other? Hopefully you were thinking something along the lines of, oh man, all of creation was saved by the ark, or saved by Noah. And in this picture, looks like it's Jesus and all the people are gathering around him, and they're getting saved by him. Or maybe you focused on the mountains that were like the similarity in the mountains. The ark at the top of the mountain here. What's at the top of the mountain here? A church. So it's like the ark is prefiguring the church. Noah is prefiguring Jesus, who saves all the people. The church saves all the creation, just like the ark saved all of creation during the flood. So here's the cool thing. It's not just Noah's Ark. It is literally the entire Old Testament. And you don't need to worry about this right-hand side. I won't test you on this, but this is the formula. It's almost like a mathematical formula, like slope-intercept form. Y equals mx plus b. If you know enough, if you know m and you know b, you can plot out every other point on that line. Same thing with, if you know an Old Testament event, and you know, the New Testament, you can figure out which events are connected to either Christ or the church. So in this case, it's Noah saves creation, specifically by obeying God. And just as Christ saves creation in the New Testament by obeying God. Or the ark brings creation to new life through the waters of the flood, just as the church brings creation to new life through the waters of baptism. So, think of any Old Testament event. There is a connection to something in the New Testament or through the church. And if you missed in class, I think every block got into this, where I just challenged them to name any Old Testament event. And every one of them, I was able to help them see the connection to Christ and the church, and how it's foreshadowing something in the New Testament. And there were a couple that I hadn't even thought about before, but just think about it for 10 seconds, and oh yeah, I can see how that works. So, famous Old Testament stories that people were able to remember were Abraham is willing to sacrifice Isaac, his only biological full son through his marriage, right? God calls him to sacrifice Isaac. They go up Mount Moriah. Isaac carries the wood for the fire of the sacrifice, and just before Abraham kills Isaac on the altar, the angel stops him, and then they sacrifice a ram instead. The ram is caught in a thorn bush around his head. So just as Christ, the beloved Son of God is sacrificed on Mount Calvary, carrying the wood of the cross to his own crucifixion, wearing a crown of thorns. Yeah, it just goes on and on. Every Old Testament event. Feel free to try and stump me or stump, prefiguration by coming up with an Old Testament event. There were some. It was hilarious. There was one block where they were just pulling random quotes from the Bible, from the Old Testament, like Leviticus, strange like Levitical laws about how to offer sacrifice, and yeah, it was passages I'd maybe read once in college, and if that, and as soon as they started reading it, other students were able to say, oh, I know that one, and they were able to connect it to, oh, it's just like how the Eucharist is sacrificed on the altar by the priest for atonement for sin. Like, it's incredible. Once you see how these connections form, the Old Testament just comes alive. Alright, so that is Roman numeral 3, Noah's Ark. I'll be making a video over 10 and 11 over the weekend here, and stay tuned. Also, the Twitter project is on Dashboard. Check that out, and feel free to get to work on that over the weekend.